next
unit.
maneuver was
Also,
formattingly to
this was
burn
the
the main
1960s,
engine of
so
his
that whole
spacecraft
maneuver had to
to
be
put it into a
performed
circular
manually
orbit.
by a pilot. No automation
But
available.
as the lunar module
Logistically, that
emerged
whole
from
system
behind the
just
moon,
doesn't work for the modern Artemis program. For one, the SLS doesn't offer the same lift capability as the old Saturn V. The Apollo-era rocket could
sir.
deliver 43
In
metric
preparing for
tons
the
to the moon, while
circularization
SLS
burn,
maxes out at
Mattingly had
27
found
tons,
apparent
which is
uncontrolled
enough to send the
oscillations
Orion
in the
capsule
main
and
engine's
service
backup
module,
control
but not
system.
much more. So
Following mission
SLS
rules,
has more
he did
thrust
not
at
make the
liftoff than
burn.
Saturn V, but a lower weight capacity. You might be wondering, what's the deal with that? Put simply, rocket
With the
equations
backup
are a
system having
nightmare.
trouble,
We're going to come back to
only
this
the
in a minute, so
primary
just
system was
keep that
known
in
to be
mind. But
usable on
even
the
if
engine
there
needed to
was
get
more
the
power
astronauts
available,
out of lunar
NASA doesn't
orbit
want
and
to
back to
just
Earth.
get by anymore
However,
with a
the
flimsy
lunar module
little
engines could
stowaway
be
moon
used
lander.
if the
The
two
whole point of
spacecraft
Artemis
were
is to
docked.
establish a strong
The first
and
step in
permanent
the
human presence
problem-solving
on the moon.
technique.
To do that, we
Stabilize
need
the
the sturdiest
situation in
landing
the
vehicle
safest
possible,
manner.
one that can
Get the
deliver
two
heavy
spacecraft,
infrastructure
which
while
had
also
separated,
supporting a
close
crew for
enough
their
together to
week-long
dock,
excursions
if
to the
necessary.
lunar surface. This is where the Artemis program becomes a tale of two gigantic rockets. SpaceX was awarded the first human landing system contract by NASA because their vehicle was by far the biggest and the most powerful option. It may not have been the most practical, but at the same time, SpaceX had already been making good progress on launch hardware like the Raptor engine and had a very solid track record of success with Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy. So NASA took Elon Musk at his word that his people would get it figured out by 2025. And they've been doing a pretty good job at that so far. Starship flew for the first time in April 2023, and then it exploded, which was not ideal, but that's not the end of the world either. SpaceX can chalk that up as a learning experience, and will make an even better attempt sometime later this summer, maybe as early as June. The lunar starship that is going to fly to the moon will be pretty similar to the designs that we've seen so far being tested at Boca Chica, but with a few key differences. The most significant being that the lunar starship will never re-enter Earth's atmosphere, so it won't require the black heat shield or the big aeroflats at the nose and tail of the upper stage. Those won't serve any function on the moon. After setting that excess weight, Starship will need a bunch of upgrades to function as a lunar lander, chief among those being a new set of landing legs. There won't be any chopstick-armed Mechazilla towers waiting on the moon. These spindly legs that we saw on the earlier Starship prototypes won't do either. The lunar Starship needs a wide, stable footprint to land on, something more similar to a Falcon 9 booster. And the ship will also require landing thrusters as well. We've seen these in a few renderings mounted on the side of the vehicle. These are going to be necessary to steer the ship on its descent to the lunar surface. Starships designed to land on Earth and Mars use aeroflaps to steer, but there's no air on the moon, so that doesn't work. The moon doesn't have very much gravity either, so it's also very likely that the Raptor engines are just too powerful for landing on the moon or even launching from the surface, unless we want to add another crater to the moon's complexion. SpaceX will also need to devise an elevator system for their lunar starship. Since the lower two-thirds of the 50-meter-tall ship are taken up by fuel tanks, the crew are going to need some help to travel the 30-odd meters that separate them from the ground. This is also going to be critical for deploying payloads to the lunar surface. Luckily, the gravity on the moon is 1/6 of the Earth, so the lift doesn't have to be particularly strong, just reliable. Above the cargo hold will need to be a crew quarters. That should be no problem considering the gigantic 9-meter-wide empty space left at the top of the ship. For just 2 people, it's going to be plenty spacious for a week-long stay on the moon. All that SpaceX really needs to do is furnish and pressurize a few levels within the upper fairing. They have a well-proven life support system from the Crew Dragon capsule that just needs to be scaled up a bit for these relatively short-duration moon landings. Figuring out a Mars life support system for Starship is going to be the hard part. And then lastly, they just need a small docking port up in the tip of the nose cone, something that SpaceX can also just lift from the Dragon capsule. This is how the Orion crew will link up with the Starship and transfer between vehicles. All of that stuff we just talked about is going to be a ton of work for SpaceX to accomplish over the next 2 years, but there is still one more significant hurdle to overcome. Remember, we were talking earlier about the rocket equation. There is more to putting stuff into space than just raw power alone. The Starship Super Heavy booster offers up to twice the thrust of the old Saturn V, and it can deliver twice the payload to the moon, 100 metric tons. And that payload also comes wrapped up inside a gigantic 9-meter wide by 50-meter tall stainless steel spaceship. But there is one major caveat here. On its own, using only the fuel that it launches with, Starship cannot go beyond low Earth orbit. By the time Starship gets just a couple hundred miles above the Earth's surface, it runs out of gas. So in order to go any higher, like, say, to the moon, Starship needs to refuel. Specifically, it needs a lot more of the cryogenic liquid oxygen and a bit more liquid methane. So before Lunar Starship even becomes a legit possibility, SpaceX actually needs to first perfect the tanker Starship. The tanker variant is going to be a totally stripped-down upper-stage vehicle. No wings, no heat shield, no legs, no cargo fairing, just fuel tanks from top to bottom. But even with the extra-large tanks, the ship will need to burn most of its own fuel just to reach orbit. That means that a reusable filler ship will have to go up and dock with the tanker to add more oxygen and methane to the reservoir. But again, even carrying nothing but fuel, the ship still has to burn most of it just to reach orbit. So it's going to require multiple docking maneuvers just to fill one tanker ship with enough propellant to then refill the Lunar Starship with enough to get it to the moon. That's going to get really expensive really fast, unless SpaceX can master the fully reusable upper stage ship. Elon Musk has said it can be as little as 4 tanker trips. Others have claimed as many as 16 launches will be required to fill one Lunar Starship. And before the Lunar Starship can be verified for human spaceflight, SpaceX will need to perform one uncrewed demonstration landing on the moon prior to Artemis 3. This puts a lot of pressure on SpaceX to deliver not just one functional Starship that can make it into orbit and come back down again in one piece, but they have to make a lot of them, and they don't have a whole lot of time left to do it. Meanwhile, over at NASA, they have already flown one uncrewed Artemis mission with the SLS and Orion to verify the flight hardware, and thanks to the overwhelming success in 2022, NASA is clear for the first crewed Artemis launch in 2024 that will feature a round trip.
You want to
drilled a hole into which a heat flow probe was to be placed, part of one of the experiments attached to the station. As Duke drilled, Young set up the central station and the remainder of the experiments. Then, what many considered the biggest disappointment of the mission.
Get some rocks down there in the regolith, Tony. You know, it looks, I bet it's just like the side of that fresh crater we saw back there at the limb. Charlie, what? Something happened here. What happened? I don't know. Here's a line that pulled loose. Uh-oh. What line is it? That's the heat flow. You pulled it off. God, I'm sorry. I didn't even know it.
So that means you've got to mate all those wires, separate wires in there, and have them insulated from one another.
That's right.
And if that doesn't occur, what are the chances of shorting out the central station?
Well, that's another one that they're working.
On Earth, they tried to figure a way to fix the heat flow. On the moon, the astronauts continued with the other experiments. Young placed a series of sensors in the soil, then fired explosive charges, mapping the lunar subsurface much as geologists on Earth use explosives to search for oil.
4, 3, 2, 1, fire. Stuck in the ground and
Engine boost activated.
They continued to sample the area and activate the experiments. Then they returned to the rover and prepared for their first trip away from the landing site in search for geological samples.
and here we go.
Their first traverse would take them about 1 kilometer west of the landing site. They would make 2 stops to collect samples and conduct experiments.
10529 is flight plan.
Better good pick a better spot.
the local magnetic field. He would later record the most intense magnetic field ever found on the moon, far higher than scientists ever suspected.
It's really some crater. As you come around there, there's a rock in the near field on this rim that has some white on the top of it. We'd like you to pick it up as a grab sample. This one right here? That's it. This one right here? That's it. You got it right there.
Okay, we copy that.
There would be one more stop before they got back to the lunar module to close out this EVA. With Duke acting as photographer and Young as driver, they put the rover through a full test.
Man, you are really bouncing. Is he on the ground at all? That's 10 kilometers. Huh? He's got about 2 wheels on the ground. Okay, turn sharp.
Enemy destroyer blown up.
Okay, here's a Sharpie. Hey, that's great. He's a big rooster tail out of all 4 wheels. And as he turns, he skids. The back end breaks loose just like on snow. Come on back, John. Okay, the deck is running. Driver like this. Okay, when he hits the craters and starts bouncing, it's when he gets his rooster tail. He makes sharp turns.